Jam-packed edition of the Shea Anything podcast coming your way. We haven't talked about Taijuan Walker, the newest New York Met. We'll discuss his place in the Mets rotation, what that will look like, plus the bullpen. Plus, we'll get into the front office and their job during these spring training months. Are they busy every day working on extensions for somebody like Lindor or Conforto? And how does they go about doing their job once they're down in Port St. Lucie? We'll talk about all of that coming up. Starts right now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Shea Anything podcast. Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you this week. Andy, are you starting to feel the seasonal optimism that comes with spring training, or because it's snowing literally every single day, are you having trouble doing that like I am?
I feel societal optimism and personal depression.
So you're optimistic about your surroundings.
I'm optimistic about the way things are trending. I read plenty of articles about COVID that it seems to be getting a little bit better, knock on wood, and that as it relates to the topic at hand, maybe we actually have a semblance of a normal season at some point. I like to look at video of people in Florida, but I wish I were there. I'm looking at freezing rain right now in my window. But you know what? We have it better than most people through this whole thing. So I'm not complaining. Yeah. Although it's harder. I think I do need to spend a few days under one of those sun lamps because this thing is dragging on a little bit, this winter pandemic business.
I know it was like 35 degrees with no wind this weekend. And I took a walk like it was 70 and sunny. It was just, I'm ready for it to be over. But enough weather small talk. Just a reminder, everybody, Baseball Night in New York, weeknights at 6 o'clock on SNY. And this week, Wednesday, we have a special 1-hour edition of Mets Hot Stove, which is right after us at 6:30 with plenty of guests from Mets camp in Port St. Lucie. This begins the time every week on Mets Hot Stove where you're going to get a lot of guests. It's going to be different from the usual stuff when Gary Apple and Todd Zeal are down in Port St. Lucie and really getting those one-on-one interviews, but they're still getting the interviews just via Zoom and stuff. We continue to try and adjust to the times. Speaking of adjusting to the times, Francisco Lindor has blue hair. He is in Mets camp. And that was really that was the kind of photo that I'm like, okay, you see Francisco Lindor in a Met uniform. You're like, okay, this is exciting. This is a superstar player in this market, wearing the orange and blue for the first time. And that was a cool thing to see. And Andy, then he gives his first press conference today. And you asked him partially about this, right? And I'm going to ask you to clarify what your question was to him. He ended up giving a lengthy description of how he thinks the game of baseball can improve. Mm-hmm. And I really thought it was a honest and really well thought out answer. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, so I asked him the same thing that I asked Garrett Cole and Zack Britton last week when they were on a Zoom, which was, why do you want to join the 8-member executive subcommittee of the union during a CBA year? This means that there's 8 people on that. 3 of them are in New York. And these are the players that will be negotiating, the top player negotiators, be negotiating with the owners in the league on the new CBA. And 3 out of 8 players that will have a substantial say in whether there's a work stoppage or not, as we fear, are Britton, Cole, and Lindor. So I asked him why he wanted to do that kind of work. He mentioned the tradition that came before him with labor. Cole had mentioned the same thing last week, saying that Neil Walker had mentored him on labor issues, and he'd done the same thing Cole had to Jamison Tyone in Pittsburgh. So there's a bit of a pay it forward thing that goes on. Lindor's, in a similar way, wanted to be part of that tradition. And then he said, we don't want the game to go sideways. There's some things that we need to fix. And miraculously, before the Mets muted me, I was able to say, like, what things? And he gave a good answer. He brought up analytics. He didn't. I think this will play as like Lindor rips analytics, and I hope it doesn't. He gave a very nuanced answer about how the information is real, but he doesn't like how it is used to hurt the entertainment product of the game for fans, and B, mean that a player like himself cannot use their instincts. And there's a specific example that he used of defensive positioning, where he said, the data shows me that 80% of the time this hitter is going to hit it one step over here. But I'm reading, he didn't say this, but I'm using my instincts. I'm reading swings. I'm got a feel for the game. where the dirt feels like today, things like that. And I want to stand here. Don't disrespect me. Let me be me. Don't tell me that my lifetime playing baseball doesn't tell me where to stand. So that was a pretty interesting comment and series of comments that he gave. Another reporter later followed up. He talked more about analytics, but that's what went on there.
And he talked about the rewarding of losing in the game, which I know is something that you've expressed opinions about before, just about how easy it is to tank right now and how easy it is to get away with it. So I'm glad that you're asking those questions, because you're getting ahead of what will be the biggest story in baseball. And I know that that's a conscious decision by you. But important for the fans of these teams, between the Yankees now and the Mets and the players that you've asked, that they know why these players are doing it. But also, I think it says a lot about the character of those players, not necessarily good or bad, but just like what they're passionate about. And that's why it's important that I think fans know who their player reps are and who's involved in these conversations, because I think that tells you a lot about the personality of someone, and also tells you what they might be like off the field or what they want to do after retirement. I've always found it interesting.
It does. And players, they, not all of them want to be informed about anything going on around them, but there are plenty, just like any group of people, but there are plenty of them who really are interested in digging into this stuff. And it's complex stuff, these labor issues, and they're on calls. You think about Cole getting ready to pitch or Lindor getting ready for the season. They're on Zooms also with union leadership and with one another, and learning about revenue sharing, which is one issue that Lindor brought up without naming it. He says, why did teams in small markets get money after losing 100 games from teams in big markets? That's revenue sharing discussion. They're learning about these issues, and they spend a lot of time communicating with each other. They talk to each other about rain delays, something as simple as that. Do you remember, Doug, when the Mets and Marlins walked off the field in protest in support of Dom Smith and in protest of the racial injustice and violence at the time? It was all about Michael Conforto talking to Miguel Rojas, the Marlins player rep. And there's this whole thing that goes on behind the scenes that fans understandably don't know about, because it, as I said, goes on behind the scenes. But these guys are really work hard on it, and they really, those that are involved in it, really care.
Yeah, it's going out of your way to take meetings and to strategize about the game and the future of the game. And I think that that's admirable. I mean, I just think that if you're interested in growing the game while you're playing it, that says something about your priorities. And I've always respected Conforto for that reason. And I think that there are a lot of markets around the country who are lucky to have players on the teams that they root for who really care about the direction of the game after they're gone. So let's talk about what has happened since the last time we spoke, which the Taijuan Walker signing interests me from all the questions that I've asked you over the last couple of months in terms of where's, Sandy and Zack Scott and formerly Jared Porter looking. What do they want to do to the rotation? Are they going to get some depth? Your answer and the reporting changed, it seemed to me, fairly drastically to I'm not sure they're in on any of these guys. They're not particularly interested in any of the starting pitching options. And then you came out and you were like, the Mets' primary interest right now is Taijuan Walker. So what changed? Was it the fact that it was time, or did their interest in the player change?
It definitely changed. You're right. So we were saying they weren't interested because they were not. The Mets, I don't think they placed a single call to Taijuan Walker's representatives about Walker for months and months and months. Just nope, they're not interested. They're not on him. And then it did change once. Well, let's look at what happened with the starting pitching market. After Bauer came off the board a couple of weeks ago, then you started to see some, the next tier of guys started to sign. They were in on James Paxton. They were in on Jake Arrieta. So it came down then to that sweet spot of talent, expected results, and then value. And they weren't comfortable with the price tags on some of these guys. And with Walker, when you think about what they got, I mean, he's not an ace, obviously, or even necessarily a top of the rotation guy. But the fact that he's making less than Trevor Rosenthal's $11 million this year, or making less than a lot of relievers and some guys who and the starting pitching market, it's a very reasonable price. It's like a fourth of Trevor Bauer's money, probably for better than a fourth of the production. So it did come down to, okay, now this starting pitching market is matched up with, like his price is finally matched up with what the Mets want to do for a starting pitcher. So they saw that value-wise, and then they had a private showcase with Taijuan Walker a little bit before they signed him. I don't know exactly which day, but he threw only for Met scouts. They liked what they saw, and then they were like, all right, let's try to sign him. And then they did.
Wow. Well, that goes to show you that whispers or lack thereof throughout an offseason can, mean nothing when the team just decides flip of a switch. We like this guy. A couple dominoes have fallen, leading us to this. And you're right to bring up Bauer, because it's easy to forget that, like, wow, the Mets just suddenly are interested in this. Well, they were willing to pay Trevor Bauer. What was it? What was the final deal? Like
$45 million they offered him over 3 years.
Right.
Yeah. And this year would have been over 40 or something, around 40 or whatever it was. Yeah. Which, I mean, on so many levels, just thank God they didn't get that guy. My God. Look at everything that's happened. Not only the price for one player, but I mean, just can all the baseball players just log off? I think that's the last thing I'll say about it.
I was about to say, I mean, the Twitter accounts in that rotation. If Bauer had signed with the Mets, you'd have Bauer, Stroman, and Syndergaard just tweeting their hearts out for
the three of them in chairs in the clubhouse with their headphones on, tweeting at each other.
How about the bullpen? Because I don't know about you, but I think I feel a little less confident in this group. Obviously, Seth Lugo's a big loss, but you look ahead and, they DFA'd or released Brad Brock, and that was like one of the guys that I had in the kind of middle relief depth area. And they're relying on a lot of volatile arms to, go a different direction. And Edwin Diaz is a question mark. Every reliever is a question mark, Andy. So do we have any idea what this bullpen is going to be like? Is there a level of confidence within the Mets organization in this group?
Yeah. Look, I asked this question of sources, of course, after the Walker signing late last week. Well, what about the bullpen? And they believe this is key. Lugo may have been in the rotation mix if they hadn't signed Walker. So they believe they improved the bullpen by signing Walker, and obviously then pushing Lugo to the bullpen. And they don't believe that Lugo is going to be out a long time. These things change, of course, and couldn't always get worse with injuries. But the current feeling among Mets people is that Lugo won't be out for very long. He'll be a key member of the bullpen. You've got Diaz, May, Lugo, kind of as your top three guys, and that's pretty good. I think that's how they would probably put it. Could they have used another guy? Sure, but would you rather have Trevor Rosenthal at $11 million or Taijuan Walker at $2 and $20-ish? With some of the luxury tax shenanigans they did, but obviously you'd rather have the 200 inning guy rather than the 60 inning guy.
Well, if what would you be willing to bet that Taijuan Walker throws 200 innings this year?
$1 million.
You think he's going to?
In my house. No, I have no idea. I think it's a fair point about.
No. I'm just saying he's not a 200 inning guy, but I agree with your point.
Starting innings versus relief innings.
Yes. Yeah. I'd rather get 140 innings or whatever than. I mean, first of all, Trevor Rosenthal do you remember at the beginning of 2019, he could not get an out.
Yeah.
Like his ERA was infinity.
Yeah.
And he was bouncing around, he couldn't get a job. So it's not that he should still be penalized for that, but at the same time, it's like the world's trying to tell us, like, don't overpay because you never know.
Oh, they also have Aaron Loop. By the way, I mentioned three guys. I interrupt you, but that's four guys.
And by the way, just a quick, funny conversation we had last week. We were talking about the opener in the newsroom, potentially about talking about on Baseball Night in New York. I actually think we're going to talk about it tonight. And Dave, our producer, was like, well, I think it's interesting. You start a game with a potential soft tossing lefty in there and Loop and kind of bring in, like, I don't know, Syndergaard or someone who throws hard. And I was like, Aaron Loop's no soft tosser. So we brought
Right.
up the video from the World Series last year. He's throwing 95.
Yeah.
So to your point on the podcast last week, it makes sense. If you haven't watched Aaron Loop pitch and you just think of him as like a journeyman middle inning lefty reliever from Toronto 6 years ago, watch the highlights of him pitching in the World Series last year. His stuff is kind of nasty. It's like he's figured something out. He's I don't know. He's a good name for you to bring up in that segment. So
Thank you.
I think you're very welcome. I think we should get into the front office down in Port St. Lucie, Scott and Alderson, and what their day-to-day is like right now. Because I said this on Baseball Night in New York as well last week. It was like the most important things that are happening in Port St. Lucie in February and March may very well be things we never see. We're not in the room where it happens. We have no idea. Conforto, Lindor, are they calling Lindor in to at least have the preliminary talks that, for example, the Padres had with Tatis that led to a huge deal? Conforto, in the really important conversations he's having, has he talked to his agent about a potential extension? So what is the Mets front office's role here?
Well,
are they anticipating things here?
Well, I know that fans want to be in the room where it happened, so I'm going to do my best to try to take them in to that. As you mentioned, the extension stuff. Look, I think the public is making, reporters like myself are making too big a deal out of this. It's like extension. Like, we've talked about this on BNNY. We'll talk about it again. If you're Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson and you feel good about where you are financially and with what you have to offer as a team, there's no problem letting these guys become free agents and trying to sign them then. I know they'd like to get it done sooner, but they need to be careful from both sides not to do anything stupid. Like, what if you don't, like, the Mets are nice. Francisco Lindor is nice, but what if they don't have the chemistry? What if they want to date a little but marry someone else? I mean, you're talking about a decade-long commitment here. If you're them, don't you want to be sure that it's a fit? So that's not going on yet on any level, any kind of extension stuff. I'm sure that there are people in the front office that are computing what they think would make sense for the Mets to do. But that's that. As far as what else they're doing, there is a good amount of like wearing floppy hats and standing in the back of the bullpen and like with your arms folded and just watching baseball in the sun, which is nice. One of the perks of being a GM or an assistant GM. A lot of the front office is going over they've got all these high-speed cameras now that film the bullpen. So there's a lot of time spent going over what they get from the cameras. Like right away, so whoever threw today, you got really advanced data on his spin on his fastball and how things are coming together. So you need a lot of time with that kind of data to try to make a team better during the year. And then this is a unique off season accidentally, but I mean it. It's still the off season. There are a lot of free agents out there. The Mets are still looking to pick up players on minor league deals. So there's more than your average, like still engaging in free agency than you would have during spring training probably. So that's what they're doing. And then once things get going, the staff meets most days. Sandy probably won't be in that every day, I wouldn't think, but Zack Scott, Luis Rojas, field staff, just going over the ins and outs, the unromantic nuts and bolts of a work day in spring training and what happened, going over data, going over plans for players that you already have in camp, things like that.
Yeah, Lindor signing with the Mets like today would be kind of an arranged marriage situation, like to your point about dating, because he just like was brought in. Now, clearly that represents interest. So it's not like these were two strangers. The Mets wanted him and traded for him. But I agree with you. I don't think I'm extending him right now, especially like you don't have to. Right. So I'm not saying he's going to like he had a rough 2020, so he's bad now. No, by no means do I mean that. I don't think that's true. But if even like a molecule in your brain thinks that, then why risk $300 million on not a sure thing?
Our friend Jim Duquette has been making some really good points on his radio show about the Tatis contract being such an unnecessary risk for the Padres. And like, just like, and Ken Rosenthal wrote something that noted too, like there's a lot of common sense to it. It's like, what if Tatis turns into Carlos Correa, where now it's like, yeah, how good is he going to be from now on? I don't know. He's not what he was when he first burst on the scene. What if Lindor goes in that direction? You got another 8 years with him. I mean, don't you want to see it for a while?
Yeah. And James Ward, another producer here, made this point last week that 14 years ago, two of the top young shortstops in the game were Jose Reyes and Troy Tulowitzki.
Oh, gosh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So
yeah,
it is a huge risk. I mean, he might not even be in the game in 14 years. I can't say I'm not a fan of it because I happen to love the player. And I think listening to AJ Preller today, I really respected what he did because he took a risk, and I appreciate that and I respect that. And I think it means something to a city and a market that just lost a football team and wants to be excited about something other than living in paradise and heaven on earth. So
yeah, I'm not feeling so bad for the San Diegans needing something to be excited about. I'd be pretty excited about that stroll outdoors right now.
No, I get it. I mean, they're just in their houses in La Jolla, Andy, and they give them something that brings them joy other than the fish tacos and the walk to the coffee shop and the seals on the beach and the.
I can't. You have to stop. I can't. I'm literally looking at disgusting rained on snow right now. So like, just enough. I can't do this joke anymore. But I will say that it feels nice for the fan bases the day it happens, but sometimes it really messes with your team for like a decade. So
another quick point on the Padres though, and I think you'll appreciate this. Every team that ends up spending a boatload of money and trying to go on a run, most of the time has like a Jason Worth signing, or maybe even a Curtis Granderson, if you want to call him that. Like
absolutely.
Eric Hosmer was that for the Padres, like the kind of first signing of even though the Padres went after it a handful of years ago, and then it was like, okay, are they going to fully blow it up now? And they, you put a veteran in place, a guy who you spend a decent amount of money on, you try and turn it around. I just was listening to Preller and I was like, okay, if you agree with Lindor that there's some big things wrong with the game, which I happen to believe, this is not the problem. Like I'm listening to
it's a problem for the Padres, not for the game.
I don't know if they might win the World Series this year. Then it's certainly not a problem for the Padres.
Yeah, but they could win the World Series with Tatis at the minimum or whatever and pay him later if he's still good. You didn't have to do it.
What if he is Mike Trout in 5 years and he's still making $24 million a year and he could be making 42?
Then that's a small risk that he's taking. It's a good point, but it's a risk of getting $340 million. He's going to be paid below market if he's a star. You make a great point about that. If he stays a star, but I just think if you're the Padres and you didn't have to do it, I mean, AJ Preller, what risk? There's no chance he's running the Padres in 14 years. I mean, it's just not unless he's Cashman. I mean, it's not usually the lifespan of a
He
GM.
Might be Cashman. He clearly really likes it there and has free reign to do whatever he wants. At least that's what it seems like. I mean, why? Yeah. Speaking of La Jolla, Andy, I mean, who do you think has it better right now between us and AJ Preller?
There's a reason why Paul DePodesta was running the Mets farm system from his house in San Diego for like half a decade. It's lovely there. It really is. Now, look, I don't want to come down too hard on the idea of these contracts happening. I get the PR benefit for it. I think it's a way better deal for the agent and the player than it is for the team in this case. So good for them. But as it relates to Lindor, it's just different because they know Tatis in San Diego. Tatis knows them, like he came up in their system and he's played for them on the major league level. To give Lindor $300 million before he's ever taken a bat for your franchise, just because that happened with Mookie Betts and the Dodgers, it seems like a very, very simple-minded way to think of this. And I think it gets annoying sometimes, both for the players and then for any of us who like to talk about something different every day, that ever since they traded for him, it's like extension. It's like, well, I don't know, like maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. Can we all just chill?
Can you imagine being a White Sox fan and having gotten James Shields for him?
That'd be a tough one. That would be a very tough one.
especially because your team is pretty good, young, exciting. And if they had him, Chicago would be fun. And I have a feeling the Cubs would be still going for it. All right. Last thing, in the absence of access, Andy, if you were down in Port St. Lucie now, free reign, no COVID, other than sitting at the bar for the house red at Carrabba's and a little chicken parm. Yeah. What would you be doing? Who would you be talking to?
Well, if I was in Florida, it would be those three Union guys, Britton, Cole, and Lindor, who I referenced before, because it's really problematic for the players and the coverage that I can only ask them questions about labor with a team official on the call. That official is either Jason Zillo with the Yankees or Harold Kaufman with the Mets, two people who deal in good faith and are not trying to do anything but occasionally mute me before a follow-up. I have no problem with these guys at all. But there is an issue with me not being able to pull these particular players aside. And I'll add Conforto to that because he's not on the executive committee, but he's involved. Hey, man, put my notebook away. What are the issues for this negotiation? What do you think? And they're not public comments, they're not on the record comments, and helps for my education to cover these things. I can call up executives. I can call up high-ranking MLB officials. I can even call up high-ranking union officials. But the game's about the players, and I can't talk to the players about these serious issues other than on a Zoom with a team official on it. That really sucks. And selfishly, all these analytics comments that Lindor made that are making the rounds online, well, damn it, that would have been an exclusive to me if I'd been there because I would have asked him one-on-one. Whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
But I would have had a really cool story to myself because I was the one that asked the question. And that gets frustrating as a reporter. It's not that important because the public still gets the information, but that's the competitive side of reporting and you want something to yourself and you can't get anything to yourself right now.
What quickly, if you don't mind me asking, what's your plan with the union stuff? Are you just doing it for your knowledge at this point, or are you trying to write something about it at some point?
I wrote about Cole and Britton the other day, and when we get off this taping, I'm going to finish my article about what Lindor said. I think it's really important to write about it in an engaging way. One thing that I learned early on in my career was that if you write about off-field topics and they read like homework, no one's going to read them, and there's no point of you writing them. So I try my best to keep them kind of light and short. But I think these are really interesting issues that it's just a thing that's happening in the game. I mean, it's not as fun for a fan as DeGrom through his bullpen today, and that's cool. I understand that. But I think we should cover all of it. I think we've all had some really good discussions on BNMY about this stuff and try to put a little bit of a guardrail on, when is this getting too boring? But just covering it all along. That's the idea.
Well, look, if it's boring now, that if people think it's boring now, then they just probably don't want to think about it, which, by the way, I totally understand. We have enough actually serious things going on in our lives that to talk about CBA negotiations and how there might be a work stoppage is not what you want to hear about. You want to hear about DeGrom throwing fastballs. However, there's no denying that it's important because it will be the only story in a matter of months. So you will be ahead of it. I'm speaking to our listeners. You'll be ahead of it if you focus on it now. What are the players telling reporters that they want to change? And it's important to listen to that because down the line, these players are in positions of power and leadership, and they're going to be arguing for those things.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. Yes. Sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, I'm just saying it might not be what you want to hear, but it's important for Mets fans to know how Lindor feels specifically because he's going to be in the room where it happens.
That's right. And just to get him on the record with that stuff as he arrives to spring training, he's never been on the executive committee before, so it was the opportunity to ask him about it. And I think that what we've learned, I've asked Cole, Britton, and Lindor the same simple question. What are the issues that are important right now that you need to fight for, or whatever, however I worded it. And they all kind of answered that. Now I feel like I know so much more through that, their answers about what the players are going to focus on. They're clearly already have done this meeting where they've got their message because they all talk about competition. They all talk about tanking. They all talk about entertainment value, which sometimes means analytics, sometimes means, a variety of things, but they're basically like kind of on the same page, which now we know sort of like what one side's going to be fighting for a bit. So look, we obviously shouldn't talk or write exclusively about that, but we do it alongside the on-field stuff. I think that's important.
Yep. All right, Andy. Well, good stuff as always. Again, we will be, I believe, fully into spring training games. The 28th is the first games. I think the Mets' first game is March 1st, and then first game on SNY is March 2nd. So we're coming up on them. So this is our last technically off-season show, and we'll be back with you next week. And thanks for listening, everybody.